Ideas have all been automatically switched off, but we'd really like you to engage with the conversation. So please feel free to pop questions in the Q&A box. You're all very used to using Zoom for this kind of thing now. So if you pop any of your questions in the Q&A box, and once Sarah and Chrissie have finished speaking, I will try to moderate those questions and pose as many to them as we can. If there are lots that we haven't been able to answer, we will try and find a way of answering them afterwards and sending the information around to you all. As I said, the webinar is being recorded, so will be made available on the MarSocsI website, so marsocsI.net. Please make sure as you're listening to our speakers today, feel free to shout about us, promote us on Twitter, and tag us using MarSocsI, so at MarSocsI, and then hashtag MarSocsI or hashtag team MarSocsI as below. I'll pop all this information in the chat box as well, so you can keep track of that. So hopefully I have our two speakers coming up. Sarah and Chrissie, can I ask you to share your video as well, please?
Videos being shared. I can see Chrissie as well. Yeah,
I'm on.
Oh, great. Okay, it's probably because I'm sharing my screen at the moment. Great. Okay. Well, so just to introduce our speakers, we have first Sarah Young, who is the Marine Governance Programme Manager at WWF. She's been working with coastal communities for 20 years as a researcher and as a conservation practitioner, and so she's going to speak to us about her involvement in the recent DEFRA-funded Marine Pioneer project in North Devon. And Chrissie will be giving insight as the North Devon kind of conservation manager, I suppose, of the Marine Pioneer. So she was the kind of on the ground person for the Marine Pioneer in North Devon, and has a lot of experience working in and around the area, and was as the coordinator for the Marine Pioneer project in North Devon. So like me, Chrissie has asked me to say that Chrissie has a research pup who might show and give it an unexpected appearance during today's session. So she asked for any kind of gives apologies just in case there are any kind of unexpected noises, or she has to disappear to kind of manage any unexpected exits that might take place to make sure pup is okay. Bodhi is behind me, so anybody who follows me will know my research pup tends to show up as well. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah and Chrissie and mute myself. So hopefully you guys will be able to share your screen now. I'll mute myself.
Hi, is that working okay for everyone?
Yeah, I can see that fine. You've still got your notes, so you just need to share a slideshow.
Oh, here we go. That one?
Perfect.
Okay, brilliant.
Great. Over to you. Oh, it's gone small again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right, I'm back. I have a research mum, so hopefully she might pop in and happy lunching, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar today. I am a terrible storyteller. I can't resist a spoiler, so I'm going to spoil this one as well by telling you the conclusion, which is that the natural capital approach has the potential to reduce the loss of nature and set us on a path for recovery. However, it does rely on a big injection of social capital to make that happen and to get things done, and also to champion the parts of the environment that aren't easily expressed in monetary terms. So I'm going to cover the three musketeers of natural capital, social capital, and the pioneers. And then I'm going to try and talk a bit about how we built the social capital in the pioneer. And then I'm going to give some examples of projects where it was absolutely vital in order for us to deliver these things, which include the Natural Asset and Risk Register, some aspects of the governance work, some of the stakeholder engagement. Chrissie, fabulous Chrissie, is going to talk to us about partnership working. And then I'm going to just allude to the recommendations that might be coming out of the pioneers shortly. Das Kapitals. So the 5 capitals model was created by Forum for the Future in the early 90s. It was work that built on decades of research by Adam Smith, Henry George, Max Weber, Karl Marx, and hundreds of others. And these social scientists were trying to explain and categorize the ways in which the world works, why we make decisions the way we do. And this particular iteration of the model was designed for businesses. It was kind of framed in terms of wealth creation, which businesses understand the desire for, and the word they use for that is capital. So every organization uses all of these different types of capital, and in order for it to be a sustainable business model, they really need to maintain all of the different types of capital assets, rather than degrade any one of them. So manufactured capital refers to things like tools and technology, machines, buildings, infrastructure, that kind of stuff. Financial capital is the one most people understand readily: money, stocks and shares. Human capital on the right refers to people's health, their knowledge, their skills, their experience, the motivation they bring. And social capital is the relationships that you have with other people, shared values, trust, communication. In a business, social capital helps people work cohesively, and it helps, and in doing that, helps the organization be effective. So for example, a person or a community with high social capital might be described as very well connected or very influential. Natural capital includes all of nature, all of the different soil, air, water, etc., that we need to sustain our lives and well-being. It's often broken into all these different categories, and this diagram kind of shows some of the things the sea does for us. So it helps regulate the climate, it stores our waste, it provides us the opportunity to go surfing or windsurfing if we wanted to. But even at this stage, you can see natural capital is getting a bit technical. The natural capital approach is often done through creating a set of accounts, which list all the different things that nature does for us and assigns them some kind of monetary value, so that businesses or government or local authorities can weigh up one development option against another. But the whole approach has a few assumptions that it's worth bearing in mind. One is that nature has a value. Two is that we can measure that value. Three is that we're assuming that we aren't accounting for the natural capital value very well at the moment, which is leading to degradation of the environment. And four, if we did account for it in some way, then we would make different decisions. Except for the first one, these are all quite big assumptions in some ways. And the Pioneer was an opportunity to test this. So what was the Pioneer? In 2018, in England, the government created a new policy document called A Green Future, our 25-year plan to improve the environment, the vision of which is to leave the environment in a better state for the next generation. It aims to make sustainable use and restoration of the environment central to society's decisions. And in response to this, the Pioneers were set up, 4 pioneers. One was set up in Cumbria, catchment pioneer in Cumbria, looking at flooding. There was a pioneer set up in Manchester, the urban pioneer, that was looking at kind of green spaces. There was a landscape pioneer in North Devon, which kind of mainly focused on agricultural practices and land use practices. And then there were 2 marine pioneers, one in North Devon and the other in Suffolk. And the pioneers were tasked with carrying out a range of demonstration projects inspired by the natural capital approach. And the outcome was hoped to be a set of recommendations that then would go into informing the next iteration of the 25-year plan. All the pioneers took on this challenge in slightly different ways. This is a summary diagram of the North Devon Pioneer, or the component parts of the North Devon Pioneer. And the Pioneer kind of acted as a big umbrella for lots of different little projects that happened underneath it, all related to natural capital. And all in all, it was pretty immense. It was a huge undertaking. And I'm not going to have time to cover in this presentation all the different aspects of the pioneer. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be talking about what happened in Suffolk, or I'm not going to be talking about the work WWF did on sustainable financing or MPAs. Where there was some amazing work done on local fisheries management plans. Tara Hooper did some great work on sustainability appraisals and local planning. And there was also some really good work on salt marshes and the value of recovered salt marshes. And also Chrissie led development of the first marine natural capital plan, which is very exciting. But there's been some webinars done on those, and we're going to send you the link to the webinars if you want to hear more about any of those aspects. What is also very important to note right at the beginning is that the pioneers weren't funded. They weren't given any money. They were also expected to operate within existing laws and regulations, which really kind of limits the innovation aspect of it. There wasn't an opportunity to collect any new marine data, so no seabed surveys or condition assessments. We kind of recycled existing data, which all made it quite challenging, to be honest. But given the body of work that's been created and the quality of the recommendations that have come out, I think the pioneers managed to provide a very clear steer on how the 25-year plan could be delivered locally in a place like North Devon. So as I said, there were two marine pioneers. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this over here, this is Suffolk, if you're not familiar with England. And then this orange box over here is North Devon, two very different kind of marine environments. And this is what North Devon looks like. It's absolutely beautiful. There's pretty little coastal fishing villages, there's areas of sand dunes and salt marsh. There's a little no-take area off this gorgeous island called Lundy, where you can see puffins and seals and kelp. The environment, oh, I've got a fly in here, sorry. The environment compared to a lot of places in England is of very high quality. So if there's any way you'd be able to show that nature has a value, it's in North Devon. As well as being beautiful, there are also some wonderful people that live there who are really passionate about being outside. A lot of people move to North Devon purely for the quality of the environment. And from the outset, we knew that these people would be vital in delivering this pioneer work. It was going to be the difference between it working or failing. It's quite a common conundrum to have big national level ambition to do something, but with limited capacity to deliver it. And then in a local place, having lots of people who could be part of delivery, but not having the resources to do it or the coordination necessary. So in North Devon, we set up the steering group, and this was a collection of different people and organisations who were all interested in the subject of natural capital, marine natural capital, and importantly had either some time and capacity or some money, some resource to put into it. From a social capital point of view, we're really lucky because we kind of hit a lot of different sectors. So we have the Marine Management Organisation, the IFCA, and Natural England, who are all kind of arm's length bodies of the government. We had Blue and WWF, who are charities. We had PML and Plymouth University, the University of Plymouth, obviously academic institutes. And then most importantly of all, perhaps, we had the North Devon Biosphere Reserve, which is a designation, but it's also kind of a partnership network, a local partnership network. We had a project officer, Chrissie, and we had some steer later on from the MMO, which was very handy. Aisling Lanning provided great leadership for us. And in the beginning, Chrissie and I knew that we had to build some social capital, and we set out to do that. WWF commissioned a scoping report which identified all the different organisations working in the region and looked at all the different marine projects that had taken place over the last 10 years. We also looked to see if there were any evaluations of these projects, of the stakeholder engagement specifically, but there wasn't really. We don't tend to do very good evaluations of our engagement work. We created an engagement strategy with principles. We set up a contacts database and tried to identify at least 2 people from each different marine sector, like fishing, ports, renewable energy, etc. We drew heavily on the social capital of the Biosphere Reserve in order to do that. And we formed a local community stakeholder group called the Marine Working Group, which was an extension of a group that already existed with the Biosphere. I've put this in. This isn't from the Pioneer, but I just want to use it to illustrate a point. This is a social network map. And what it shows you is each of those blobs is a person, and each of the lines is a connection to another person. And if you look at this map, you can see that, for example, at the top there in the light blue is a youth club. So there's all the people there in the youth club know each other. There's probably that bigger dot is probably their leader or coordinator. And they know all of them, but they also know the blob in the yellow blob in the middle. And what we tried to do was get Chrissie to be the yellow blob in the middle, who knows the big blobs connected to all the groups. It seemed the most efficient way for us to reach the maximum number of people possible. Coastal partnerships are a good example of this function that already exists locally and would be vital if you're going to implement the 25-year plan locally. And over the course of the last few years, we've literally drawn in thousands of people, not just from North Devon, but regionally, nationally, and even internationally. At the bottom here, you can see this is an exchange we did with WWF Kenya. They came over to learn about what was happening in the North Devon Pioneer. This photo here is of fishermen when they were sitting down helping us to prioritise what we needed to do in relation to fishing. And obviously there's beer and Cornish pasties in that picture. And mainly, we definitely needed these people for their resource, for their expertise, to help check what we were doing was okay, to feed in information and to spread information to help us get things done. And the currency that we used to generate this social capital was mainly cups of tea, free lunches, being chatty and friendly, taking time with people to actually talk to them, and trying to bring them along on the journey of the Pioneer as we went. Okay, let me switch my page. So the next few slides are courtesy of Sean Rees, Matthew Ashley, and Andy Cameron from Plymouth University. And this is an example of how you'd normally, I suppose, go about a natural capital assessment. And this is an example of an activity that required a lot of input from other people. So first, we created something called a natural capital asset and risk register, which involves identifying all the ways, all the benefits that we get from nature, especially when it's in good condition, and the risks to those benefits under its current use. Essentially, it looks like a set of overlapping maps and tables that describe the benefit from each natural asset, as they call it. It attempts to quantify how much of each we have, salt marsh or whatever, and then looks at the quality of them and asks, is it in good condition? And then looks at the trend, is that condition improving or decreasing? And layers it all up together. All this information was collected through the social capital of the universities, who had a lot of connections already, and put into something called a GeoNode, which then made it accessible to everyone else. Like collating data is a massive task in and of itself. This is an example of one of the tables that sits behind it. In the colourful column, you can see all the different types of kind of marine seabeds, I suppose, and then along the top you can see their different benefits that they give to us. These boxes, the darker the colour, the greater the connection between that, whatever this is, and this, whatever this is. In this case, wild caught fish and circulittoral rock. And the number in the box relates to how certain we are, how much scientific evidence we have for that connection. This is all very comprehensive, and all of this is in a report that's easily accessible for you. The next step was to think about, what are we trying to achieve, and do we have enough natural capital to achieve that? And Sean and her team did this in two ways. One, they looked at national policy priorities and compared the status and extent of the condition of habitats and species with things like the UK Marine Strategy targets. But they also did a lovely participatory exercise, asking community members what they valued and what they thought was at risk, that all went in together to form this risk register, which is a really useful policy management tool. And it basically says, if you want to achieve like healthy wild caught fisheries, they're actually at risk at the moment because of their status and because of the way we're managing them. Some of the things that came out as a risk in North Devon were wild caught fish, salt marsh, water quality, and recreation opportunities. As you can see, this is a very strategic, logical task. It's great at prioritizing things and is a very defendable evidence base when you want to push for change. But it does heavily rely on a lot of information, which can be very sparse in the marine environment, not just in relation to the ecology, but also in relation to the human dimensions, what people value. And where there are gaps in the information, it can be hard to make certain recommendations, and the unmeasurable things, often the cultural and social aspects, get kind of played down a bit, not because they're not important, but just because we haven't really historically invested in collecting that information. But overall, the conclusions of the work were that marine habitats and species provide a wealth of value that underpins our well-being. Some of the aspects of nature are okay, some of them are not so okay. And the next step is to try and work out who is benefiting from this natural capital. I put a rope in this picture because it's a nest of snakes. But governance is it's been the key theme that's come out of all 4 pioneers. It's really important to understand your governance and get the governance system right in a place. One of the ways we did this was we did a workshop with the Marine Working Group. We had 60 of them looking at trying to identify who was involved in decision making in North Devon and trying to work out how powerful those people were. So we had a big circle and we asked them to name all the people they could think of and put the more powerful people in the middle, less powerful towards the outside. And they managed to identify 143 different organisations that were involved in marine management and governance, which is fantastic for such a tiny place. And it's, in terms of social capital, it's really good. But it also brings challenges in around communication between those different groups and coordinating them all. 40 of the organisations identified were thought to be particularly powerful or influential. And the majority of those organisations weren't from North Devon, they were national organisations. We also asked people on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the most, do you feel like you have meaningful input into marine management decisions? And the most popular score, the average score, was kind of 4 out of 10. People felt like they did have, they could input to decisions, mainly through consultations, formal consultations, but they had very little influence over the resulting decisions. And again, just like social capital isn't all about the number of people you know, it's also about having trusting relationships and mutual understanding. So despite this being quite a large group of people active in North Devon, they actually have quite low social capital because they aren't very connected to those central decision makers. So in terms of engagement, there are 2 enemies of building social capital. Well, in fact, there are many, but 2 of the ones that we came across in the Pioneer are 1, making people feel stupid, and 2, not showing that you care about the things that they really value, especially when you can't put a pound on it easily. In terms of making people feel stupid, the most obvious thing is the language you're using, and Chrissie's going to talk about this, so I'm not going to talk through this slide. But suffice to say that you need to use appropriate language for the group you're talking to, avoid acronyms, and don't assume any prior understanding. We went in talking about marine protected areas, and most people had no idea there were even marine protected areas. So we'd already lost people. And don't try and explain your technical terms, actually, like I've just done. Don't use them at all. Just try and find some other way to talk to people. This is an example of how we tried to capture the non-monetary values of the sea. We made 6 short films, they're about 5 minutes long, that take you from the moors all the way down the river to Lundy Island. And each film highlights why nature is important to somebody in North Devon. It gives them a voice to explain in their own words what they really value about marine natural capital. And every one of them is just beautiful, and it was really hard to pick which one to show you. They all demonstrate different marine values. And Chrissie chose this one. I think it's a good one too. But they've been picked up by the Sky Nature channel, so they're quite widely available now. And this one shows Jasmine, who runs the Wave project. What I think I'm going to have to do is stop sharing and then reshare the... Oh no, where is it? Oh, hold on.
Do you want me to share?
Yeah. Oh yeah, go on then, Chrissie. Remember to press on the little sound button. Is it working?
Not yet. It's all right. We'll give you a second.
Technical glitches
are all part of the process. There you go.
If you look beyond the shifting sand dunes of Braunton Burrows, you can see a vast expanse of ocean and hear the sound of the waves crashing against the beach. Known for its world-class surfing and family-friendly beaches, North Devon is a popular tourist destination, which in turn supports a vast array of local businesses and organisations. Situated within the North Devon UNESCO Biosphere Reserve and surrounded by areas designated to protect important marine life, the sea here is a special place for both people and nature. Jasmine Bennett is a young surfer who has grown up living just a stone's throw from Saunton Sands and Court Beach. Jumping in the sea at the end of a long day helps Jasmine relax and reconnect with nature and her surroundings. As a volunteer and surf coach for the Wave Project, a surf therapy program helping young people, Jasmine can see firsthand the healing effects of the sea.
There's something so therapeutic and healing about being in the water, whether that's like lying down in the shallows at ankle deep. So the Wave Project is a charity which basically organises around running surf therapy courses. They're supporting disadvantaged young people to get in the water. So those disadvantaged young people are offered a 6-week surf course. So that might be from never having been in the sea before all the way up to hopefully getting to their feet. And I know that for some of the young people, it's one of the only times in their life that they have people who are hanging out with them unpaid, and really like eye-opening for them to realise that people are not just there because they're professionals, but because they also love surfing and they want to share it with them. And that's really special when you meet moments like that. There's really similar responses when you have a good wave, just that absolute joy. I think probably one of the things that I love so much about the sea here is because it's always different every single day, whether that's seeing a slightly different part of the coastline at a different tide time, or the conditions just being so different from day to day. I think my favourite thing about being in the water and probably surfing is times where I get a really good wave. It feels like flying. North Devon is really special because it's part of a marine protected area. That means that I get to see and sometimes even interact with wildlife that I might not see other places. I think it's super important that surfers, all water users, not just surfers, all people care about marine conservation. We're at such a crisis point with how the oceans are right now, so it's so important that we all engage as much as we can, because we rely on the ocean for so many different things, so it's so important that we all engage as much as we can. Starting small is usually quite easy. beach cleaning or volunteering for a conservation group. But I suppose it comes all the way back to thinking about your own consumption and your own footprint as a person, because I feel like we have a moral and social responsibility to do that.
People and wildlife need a healthy ocean to thrive. We rely on it to regulate our climate, support livelihoods and well-being, and provide half the air we breathe. But our seas are under threat, and we need people to act to reduce their impact and promote careful management so we can protect the sea for us and for future generations. If you've been inspired to join in and take action to protect our environment, please visit the website to find out how.
Thanks, Chrissie. Let me get this back up. That's wonderful, right? What an amazing young woman. And yeah, I mean, you should definitely go and watch the little films. They're very short and they're all really special, and it would be great for us to be able to champion those people talking about what's important to them in this kind of way. So all of the things that were learnt through the Pioneer, we've tried to we've made a big effort to produce summaries, guides, accessible versions of reports. I wanted to flag two PhD students in particular, Beth Wells and Rachel Holtby, who've been working on systems analysis and governance aspects of the Marine Pioneer, and will hopefully be publishing some of their PhD work soon. I also wanted to flag, we had a social science roundtable, the Gulbenkian hosted last year, that had some really interesting discussion and findings in it. And I think the report from that is available online as well. But what I wanted to do in this slide was just to acknowledge what a massive team effort it was to try and test this natural capital approach in North Devon. And I think that for me, the thing that was the key to success was actually Chrissie. I'm going to let her talk in a minute. But I suppose the conclusion from me is that we won't be able to deliver the 25-year plan for the environment in an actual place without building social capital first. The social capital gets things done. The final recommendations from the Pioneer will be out soon, and when you read through them, there's references all over them to systems approaches, the need to connect and coordinate people, to co-produce work, to work in partnership, to build trust through transparent decision making. Social capital is also, as I've said, vital to understand the multiple ways in which we benefit from the sea beyond like a numbers-based approach. And I'd say a first step, if we were going to implement the 25-year plan properly, it was to invest in these local social infrastructure, you could call it, the networks we need to deliver, and to start filling some of those marine and social data gaps that exist and still make it hard to compare and trade off decisions that organisations, governments and communities make. I'll pass over to Chrissie.
Hello. Right, I'm going to try in 5 minutes to discuss how we involved local communities and also develop the partnerships that were needed for the Marine Pioneer. And I hope I don't duplicate anything Sarah said. I don't think I will. So let's start with the fact that Marine Pioneer was a technical jargon heavy programme. And how do you marry that with local aspiration? So we started off with 4 asks from DEFRA, which were test new tools and approaches, demonstrate integrated planning and delivery, look at sustainable financing and share our lessons. And this was all based on the 25-year environment plan that when we started the Marine Pioneer wasn't actually published. So we had that barrier to overcome as well. So we were using all that terminology within those 4 asks, plus things like natural capital, ecosystem services. And that's hard enough for those that have already been involved with previous projects, let alone if we need to bring new people in, which we did need to for this new idea, was it was going to become really challenging. So we did our best to A, involve people, and B, not use technical language. So the first thing we did was actually none of this stuff means anything to our local people. What does is, what are their goals and aspirations? What do they want to see to how we're going to improve nature in the marine environment for over the long term? So we pulled our marine working group, which was very small at that point, together and asked them, what are your core values? And they came up with some really interesting themes: sense of place, biodiversity, governance, research. And they came up with 9 clear goals, some of which included a viable and sustainable fishery, increased local decision making, reducing marine litter, responding to climate change, and coastal tourism. So we had a lot of different ideas there. And as Sarah mentioned, they were involved in some of the technical aspects, for example, the risk register. But more importantly, and this is the important bit, how their input was used was fed back to them on a regular basis. And we did this quite a lot. So we did the you said, we did, or we could not do. And that was the thing. And that's the managing expectations bit. So if for example, their aims and ideas didn't sit well with the aim of enhancing the marine natural environment, we had to manage that and tell them, this is something we can't do here. We can't do that within this programme. Or maybe not at all, as it was hosted by the biosphere, and within the biosphere, it had to sit within the biosphere strategy. And secondly, so it was letting them know what we could or could not practically do, either within the time frame, because it's only a 3-year programme, but also how they may be able to influence policy and management. And because this was a DEFRA-led programme, there was a particular issue with that, in that there was a high level of expectation of how much influence we would have on policy and management. And this can, and at times did, promote feelings of exclusion. So, what's the point in doing this if our ideas aren't considered? So really what you need to do is make sure you can understand what can be done from the offset and what can't, and possibly what can be done elsewhere. So I did a lot of signposting of where people might be able to help. And this is trying to establish that level of trust and credibility that was needed to deliver the pioneer, and it was a real challenge. So how do you get a partnership working well together, or a group of people working well together? And Sarah may want to expand on the forming, storming, norming and performing model, as although this is what we did, I've just found out that's what it's called, but I do like it. So it's how you pull a team together to become industrious, cohesive package. How you turn a group of people who are basically could possibly be strangers in the offset into a team that trust each other and work well together. So I'm going to use the North Devon Marine Pioneer Steering Group as an example. Communication was key. The members of the steering group had their own aims, ideas, and funders, and that's that is an issue in itself. And it was useful to have someone, and I'm blowing my own trumpet here, I do apologise, to identify where there was overlap and where there were opportunities to expand on work. So sharing resources may produce a bigger package. There were a lot of conversations where honesty was key, allowing concerns and ideas to be raised. And I've recently asked a lot of the steering group members, because I felt our steering group worked well. And so I asked a lot of the steering group members, what do you feel was the key thing that helped? And one thing that came up was that actually, because this wasn't well resourced by one organisation, it was a group of organisations, there was no clear lead organisation that drove the direction. And this allowed us to adapt. It gave us the flexibility to adapt. And we could be led by the Marine Working Group and other groups in the area, as well as the steering group organisations themselves. So going back to the Marine Working Group, as Sarah mentioned, this was a small group that has worked within the biosphere previously on marine projects and identifying marine issues. So, but when you're talking about, these were the usual suspects, and you can kind of work out who might be in the room. It would be fishermen, it would be conservationists, and so on. But we needed to bring other people into the room if we're talking about coastal tourism, recreation. So you've got to think about those people as well. And it was the help of having Sarah, who was a critical eye, who came in and looked. I do apologise for that. So provided that critical eye, as well as the governance exercise that we did, that then meant we could identify who needed to be involved in that in the Marine Pioneer. And this doesn't mean the different organisations then joined the Marine Working Group. We had to go out to them. So we went to their groups and individuals, and even those groups that aren't structured, such as they're defined by a shared aim. So maybe fishermen or something like that. This meant we weren't preaching to the choir, not using those that were already there and knew what we needed to do. And it meant the delivery was actually, of the programme, was more than just one partnership. It was a range of partnerships and organisations and individuals. So that is how we involve the local community. I don't know if there's anything else you want to expand on there, Sarah.
No, very well said, Chrissie. Thank you.
I do have some recommendations.
Okay, go
from that.
Ahead.
So delivery of a natural capital plan or a natural capital approach in a place is find shared aims and aspirations and manage expectations, try not to disappoint, and that's a really hard one. Have real conversations, prepare to be challenged and prepare to be surprised. And don't use the usual suspects. Don't rely on the people who are already involved. Get out into the community and be involved with them. Thank you. I'm going to mute myself now because my house has just descended into madness.
Thank you, Chrissie. And I think that's it. So thank you. And I'm going to hand over to Emma.
That's great. Thank you very much, guys. I'm so glad Research Pup decided to make itself known. Excellent. I'm glad the apology came in use at the beginning. Thank you both very much for that talk. It was great to kind of hear those messages. I'm not sure Chrissie appreciated being referred to as a yellow blob, but overall, I think it was great to hear the messages and the importance of building that social capital and building those trusting relationships, that co-production connection between organisations and local community members. And I think crucially, Chrissie, as you said, going to people that wouldn't normally be involved, making sure you're actually getting those different groups and not just, I guess, preaching to the converted and to the usual suspects. I think, Sarah, the point you made about investing in local networks to deliver the international and national objectives that we're all committed to now is really, really crucial. I think we've got all these really big things that we're trying to achieve, and actually without working with people on the ground and building that social capital and those connections, it's difficult to see how we're going to be able to achieve all of that. So we've got some questions from our lovely participants, and if any, but we've only got about 12 minutes left, so we'll try and get through as many as we can, and if there's anything we don't manage to cover, what I'll try to do is put them to Chrissie and Sarah afterwards and include them or at least bullet points alongside the recording of the webinar on the Marsuckfly website. So we'll try and make sure we get those responses to you anyway. So the first question that we have is from Isa, and it's what is the relationship between social ecological systems and social capital?
Do you want me to try that one?
Go for it. I'm not here to answer questions, I'm here to ask them.
Oh, you could answer that one. I know you could, Emma. What's the relationship between social ecological systems? Well, social ecological systems are just how we interact with nature, I suppose, and social capital it plays a part in in explaining, I suppose, how we interact with nature in different ways, how we organise in different interest groups to do different activities. But I think it can also help explain some of the outcomes of social ecological systems in terms of the distribution of social capital within a community. Different people have different amounts of it, and in some senses it also equates to power and decision power. If you've got a lot of social capital, you're very influential, and if you want certain things to happen in the environment, you're more likely to get those outcomes that you want. And I think it can be used to help explain why we've ended up with the state of the environment we have. So I think social capital is a lens, and the techniques around measuring it are tools to understand the relationship between people and the environment. That's probably how I'd answer that one.
I would say it's not a test, and forgot to unmute myself. That was a test. I have a question from Maria Vittoria Mara, who says, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. And Maria, yes, we'll make sure that the links to the webinars and any information that Sarah said goes out alongside the recording of today's session. But she also asks, have you found fishermen naturally collaborative with the project, or did you have to work on trying to get their trust beforehand?
I can answer that one if you want. Some of the fishermen in North Devon had already been involved in previous projects, in particular the Marine Conservation Zone designations. So we already had that footing. And there were key people that were already within that community that were already involved, but we needed to talk to as many other fishermen as possible. So we actually made the effort, and this is one of the things that was key for the delivery of Marine Pioneer ideas and the Marine Natural Capital Plan was we went out to the fishermen at each port. So we actually went to where they are, so that because they're very busy, and when they came in, landed their fish, we sat with them, gave them something to eat and drink, and had a chat with them and asked them what their issues were. We did we defined what issues we could help them with and what we could, and we worked with them. Unfortunately, just as we were getting to the point where we were going to sit down and do some workshops with them, COVID hit. So we will have to redo that again. That is, I'm pretty sure we're going to have to go back out and get that footing again. It's one of those very resource heavy things you need to do, but it provides the most benefit.
Yeah, another good example was obviously we were using people to get information and to feed the project, but you need to do something in return always. You always have to give as well as get. That's what forms the bond. So in relation to the fishermen, for example, we knew that they were really interested in herring, and they'd said for a long time that there are more than one type of herring around here. There are different kinds of herring, and they're spawned at different times, and they can be caught at different times. And nobody really believed them, I suppose. And one of the projects that was led by Adam at Blue looked into that for them to see whether there were different genetic populations. And it turned out, obviously, that there were. So, and then their local knowledge is now codified in science, which helps make the case when they're making an argument for local management being important.
And that was partnered up with Swansea University, and that's another, that networks, links. Yeah. So more work was done by the different links that were identified, not by me in this time.
Great, thank you for that. And there's a question from Natasha Simmons quite early on, actually, in relation to, Sarah, the comment you made about the lack of funding for the pioneers. And she asks, is there any other evidence that they are supporting natural capital approaches further from their high-level policy and the non-funding approach, kind of other areas?
I think there are. I mean, there are lots of guises for natural capital. I know that the government is particularly interested in net gain at the moment, funding a lot of projects to look into net gain. There is the Natural Capital Committee, which is all about promoting the government's use of natural capital. There are all up and down the country, there are people making business cases for different natural assets to get them funded by private funders, usually kind of insurance companies, actually, kind of sea level rise and the risk of flooding as a big incentive. So I think it's a frame that actually works really well with this Conservative government. They are interested in it, and there are bits of money floating around, not generally directly from DEFRA, but certainly from some of the other government bodies to do pieces of work around natural capital. It's just not very coordinated at the moment, I'd say. Again, the need for coordination being key, so that we can all learn the lessons that come out of all those different things. Hopefully when the pioneer recommendations come out from the 4 different projects and are pulled together, that will make a really strong case for where and how natural capital should be applied.
So that kind of speaks to a question that Adele Powell has asked about whether the pioneers offer any sort of information on longevity or sustainability post the 3 years of the projects. So I guess that will come out through those recommendations documents that you've mentioned already.
Yeah, because I suppose the whole point is to try and implement the 25-year plan in local places, and if the government does go ahead and follow through with that, then that would be part of the legacy of this and the other pioneers.
Great. And then just again related, I'm trying to kind of group the questions. So related to that question on funding and kind of engaging with communities, Anna Woodhead says, kind of reflects on the point, Chrissie, that you made around being the importance of being very much engaged with communities, but actually that funding often can be done in quite a piecemeal way. It's around projects. So once the project funding is gone, that engagement often stops. So any thoughts on how that could be juggled longer term, and how you manage expectations from community members around those timelines, that loss or that kind of unpredictability, I guess, of funding, uncertainty around funding, and how you kind of manage that so that that local knowledge and local engagement isn't lost?
I think, you know, funding is key. And that is a big issue, that we have these projects that end and people just get very disheartened and disappointment, and they sort of think, what's the point in getting involved if 2 years down the line it all stops? And we're trying to address that through our Marine Natural Capital Plan in North Devon. So setting up the governance that is suitable for the area, for the marine environment, that it provides that bridging link between different organisations and groups that are involved in the marine environment, not just in marine management, in decision making, but also in the use of. And we're also looking at sustainable finance mechanisms, and we could go into a great conversation about what we're going to do. There are a couple of webinars out there talking about this specifically. And we're looking at it at a biosphere level, and WWF are looking at it at a national level. So I think it is actually, funding is key. So we need to find a way to make the funding work so that that continues to happen.
Great, thank you. I have a question from Isa, who says, for social inclusiveness in coastal marine projects, local people should not only be involved in the collection of data, they should also be part of the project from the concept stage and writing proposals. And I guess is just interested in a reflection on that, and in reflection of the role of local communities, and her work, I think from her comments, seems to be based in Indigenous and local communities in Canada. So I guess just a reflection on your thoughts on that role of local communities, and how we can, as researchers, as practitioners, bring local communities into research from that early stage that we all say we're trying to do, but making sure it really is from the beginning of a process. Any thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, well, we were quite lucky in a way with this one, because the natural 25-year plan wasn't out already, because we didn't have a clear steer on what we needed to deliver. We actually had an opportunity, I'm not by any means saying this was kind of co-design and co-produced with the community, but we had those meetings at the beginning to set out what do you want to see from this, and what do you want us to do, what are your ambitions for this area, which shaped us all the way through. So that was really useful. I think that it's vital, but it is costly, and it involves this social capital, and that we've already identified needs desperate funding. because you have to do it well. You can't do it half-hearted, and there are huge expectations on what any kind of project will do, how it will help. And especially as this one, given that we had Chrissie, who was amazing, but just one person really to kind of coordinate and do all the engagement, you have to match your entry point on the ladder of participation to your resources and what you're able to achieve. So yes, we desperately need more co-production and people being involved from the start. And I'm hoping that this presentation, the recommendations from the Pioneer and other initiatives will go to help making that case.
Mm. I mean, one of the things that, as I say, we were a few steps on the ladder to doing that exactly with a fisherman, is co-designing an idea for management of shell fisheries. But that was right at the, it had gone from the concept to an idea to actually, can we do something now? And we did have DEFRA listening to us about that as well. But that, as I say, COVID has really put a blocker on that.
I think that's going to be one of the challenges for lots of us that work in community engagement, is how we've kind of lost 4 months of time and of effort that we would have normally been working with communities on a much closer level, and social media only goes so far. Spending time with people to kind of build those relationships, I think that is going to be something that is challenging over the next 6-12 months, however long things go on. I know we're at 2 o'clock, but I've got a couple of more quick questions. I thought I'd ask if you guys are happy to stay on just for a couple of minutes. Bethany Wills says, amazing to get all the details in. Thank you very much for a great talk. Would like to know a little bit more about the role of bridging individuals and organisations that helped link across different scales. So what needs to happen post the Pioneer to retain that built social capital, and what's the role of those organisations looking to the future?
I'm going to say that we need an Aisling as well as a Chrissie. You need the bridging individual. You need someone who is within the management organisations.
So for those who don't know, Aisling is Aisling Lannan for the Marine Management Organisation.
Sorry, yes.
For those who might not know,
she was the Marine Pioneer lead.
Yeah, I think it comes down to interest and time. You need somebody within all of the organisations at all the different levels to have dedicated time to this, to joining other people's meetings, to reading information they get, to sending out information about what they're doing. I don't think it's the role for one person, one organisation. Coastal Partnerships have been trying to do this for a long time, and they're great, but they don't always have the access, especially to the kind of national level decision-making structures they need to be that bridge. So I feel like it needs to be a group of people who have some dedicated time, and all their job is transferring information between those different scales.
Partnership liaison officer in each organisation, how amazing would that be?
Well, so Sue Ranger has asked, do we think that increased social capital could be seen as a bit of an insurance asset, so that we're insured by investing in social capital, we're kind of insuring against those gaps in funding, those project end dates? So if we invested in social capital, would that be a way to improve resilience and ensure that momentum and that continuity, even if that funding kind of disappears for a while, or that kind of thing? What are your thoughts on that?
That was of course, that was beautifully put. Well done, Emma. I think even on a local scale, on a little scale, when we were working, we did try and make sure we had more than one person. Is another thing. It's all very well if that capital is held in one person and they go and get another job. But if you have it in at least 2 or 3, then you again build in that resilience to changes and try and keep people on for a long period of time. We spent a good deal just understanding what had happened in the past when we got there. So the longevity of those positions is quite important as well.
Yeah, and how that affects people's relationships and how they'll communicate with each other. Okay, I think this is the final question. Oh, we've got a comment from Aisling. I'm not sure if everybody can see the comment, so I'm reading it just in case. So Aisling has just said that to back up the point about connectors and bridging people, so adding support to that comment and highlight, be great to use social science to show how important and valuable those connectors and bridging people and bridging organisations are, because currently that role is not valued highly enough within organisations, but I think just supports what you guys have said as well. So thanks for that, Aisling. So our final question is from Debbie Podreski, who says, for the natural capital approach, when tracking between the various habitat types that occur and the ecosystem services they provide, you seem to use a very fine scale of ecosystem definitions. Do you think that added to difficulty and complexity by restricting the available data and knowledge that might have been around for those particular ecosystems, and does it possibly give a false impression of how much we know? For instance, if we use wider ecosystem descriptors, it might make things easier while allowing more of the area to be confidently assessed. So that's a kind of a point and a question. And then finally was expert or stakeholder judgment, so using qualitative data used to fill knowledge or data gaps. That was quite a long question, so hopefully I made it make sense.
Yeah. I think for the natural capital asset and risk register, that's what it's referring to, isn't it? They sound like quite narrow definitions of different seabed environments, for example. They're based on the UNIS codes, and I'm pretty sure, I'd have to check with Sean, that she did have to aggregate to broader categories in order to try and work out the values that she was going for. I mean, there's definitely a call to use finer scale or different scales for different ecosystem services. For example, the ability of different types of mud habitat to absorb carbon versus different types of sediments. It's actually quite important if you're going to put in place management measures like any kind of protection or restoration that speak to very specific kind of types of habitat. So yeah, aggregation could be used, and again, it depends at which scale. If you're looking at the UK, then valuable. If you're looking at North Devon, and specifically at individual valuable species like herring, for example, they like a very specific type of gravel to spawn on. You need to know where that is, so you need to have the level, you need to have the detail.
That granularity can be really helpful. Yeah.
And what was the other question?
The second question was whether or not qualitative data, so interviewing stakeholders and community members, was used to fill in any knowledge gaps that might have been present in the quantitative data, like around the ecology and ecosystem services in the areas.
I think it was in some regards, wasn't it, Chrissie?
Yes,
not
it
all
was.
regards, but
no, not in all the regards, but the fishermen were used to identify fishing grounds. So it was fisher map was used, plus some further work with the local fishermen. That's one example. I haven't got great detail on what else. But.
And the input that the working group gave to which assets they thought were at risk, for example, is social data. It's a gap that they were filling. That's not from scientific kind of publications. And again, was invaluable. There was a lot of interviews done, a lot of information collected, but I think rather than directly feeding it into the asset and risk register, for example, it was used as the basis for broader recommendations about what was working and what wasn't working, which seemed an appropriate use of it given how it was collected and the questions we were asking.
Great. Okay. Debbie's apologised for the length of the question. It's okay.
Oh,
it's fine. We don't mind. It's good to get good questions. That's great. That's all the questions I think that we've managed. I think there were a couple in the chat box. I'm just making sure. Oh, one final one from Natasha Simmons is: does the Pioneer do any information sharing with the Isle of Man biosphere? I guess it would be with whether the North Devon does any.
North Devon biosphere does. Yes.
Great.
And obviously, as the host for the Marine Pioneer, he will share the coordinator for the biosphere will share with Isle of Man.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you both so much for being the very first Mars Oxide webinar speakers. Big round of applause. It's a bit strange not to have that for you. And thank you all for attending today's lunchtime session. I hope you all found it interesting. As I said at the beginning, the session was recorded, so the recording and the slides will be made available after today's talk, so probably in the next couple of days. And I'll also be trying to make sure any useful links to any of the reports or the other webinars that Sarah and Chrissie mentioned will be made available through the Mars Oxide newsletter, but also on our website and YouTube channel. So make sure you check out those different platforms to access the information. If there's anything that you guys would like to know a little bit more about that was mentioned in today's talk, we could look into finding a speaker to talk about that. So if you're particularly interested in sustainable finance, or in the participatory mapping, whatever it might be, we can look into organising a future webinar and focusing on that. So do let us know if you're interested in that, just by emailing info@marsoxi.net. And our next session, our next webinar will be later in August, so keep an eye out in the newsletter for announcements about that. And I think that's everything I wanted to say. So thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your Monday and the rest of your week, and speak to you all soon. That's great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having us, Emma.
Thank you.
Marsoxi.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.